Way back around 551 BC, the prophet Daniel had this vision, and it was so intense, so cryptic, that an angel literally had to come down and explain it. Even then, people have been debating what it all means for thousands of years. So today, we're going to dive in and try to decode one of the most famous and honestly controversial prophecies in the entire Bible, Daniel's 2300-day vision. Right at the heart of this whole thing is this one urgent question. You find it in Daniel chapter 8, where one angel turns to another and basically asks, how long? How long is this going to go on? How long will God's sanctuary and his people be trampled underfoot? It's that single question that kicks off this whole prophetic timeline.
But, that question didn't just come out of thin air. To really get the answer, you first have to see what Daniel saw. And what he saw was this epic, symbolic vision of clashing beasts, which represented the huge empires that were about to take over the world stage.
And the vision gets incredibly specific. First, Daniel sees a ram with two horns. One horn grows taller than the other, which is a perfect picture of the Medo-Persian Empire, where the Persians eventually became way more powerful than the Medes. Then, boom, a goat comes charging in from the west, moving so fast its feet don't even touch the ground. The text straight up tells us this is Greece, led by its notable horn, and there's really no doubt that's a reference to Alexander the Great. And if you look at the history books, it's just wild how perfectly this lines up. Alexander's conquest was like a lightning strike, unbelievably fast. But just like the vision said, that great horn was broken right at the peak of its power. Alexander died suddenly when he was only 33 years old, and his massive empire just shattered, eventually getting carved up between his four top generals. Okay, so let's get to the next part of the vision, because this is where the story takes a really dark turn. The prophecy says that out of one of those four new kingdoms, a little horn would rise up. And this guy, this figure, would become this terrible persecutor of God's people. He's the one who causes the crisis that made the angel ask, how long in the first place?
And history gives us a name for this little horn. Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He was a king from the Syrian part of Alexander's old empire. Now, he called himself Epiphanes, which means the illustrious one, but his enemies, they had a clever little nickname for him. They called him Epimanes, which means the madman. And, well, his actions pretty much proved them right.
Now, to understand just how horrific the things Antiochus did were, you have to get what the daily sacrifice meant. This wasn't just some routine ritual. This was the constant morning and evening offering at the temple in Jerusalem. It was the absolute heart of Jewish worship, the center of their entire relationship with God.
So Antiochus unleashes what the prophecy calls the transgression of desolation. He went right for the throat. He stopped the daily sacrifice. He put up a statue of Jupiter inside the temple itself. He outlawed the entire Jewish faith, burned their sacred scrolls, and slaughtered tens of thousands of people who tried to resist. It was a full-on, systematic attempt to completely erase their identity.
So everything we've just talked about, the clashing empires, this madman of a king, the trashed temple, all of it is the backdrop. It's the setup that leads to that desperate question in verse 13. And now we finally get to the answer in verse 14.
Let's just circle back to that question one more time. How long? It's a question about survival, about hope. It's asking, when is this nightmare finally going to be over so the sanctuary can be made right again?
The answer the angel gets is precise, but it's also pretty mysterious. For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored. 2,300. Okay, but 2,300 what? And how does that timeline actually play out?
Well, the most direct historical way to look at it is to connect those 2,300 evening and morning sacrifices to the literal days of the crisis. It seems to start around 171 BC, when Antiochus first started messing with the priesthood, and it ends in December of 164 BC. That's when a Jewish rebel leader, Judas Maccabeus, heroically recaptured Jerusalem, cleansed the defiled temple, and rededicated it to God. And get this, that exact act of rededication is what Jewish people still celebrate today as Hanukkah.
So, case closed, right? The timeline fits the history of Antiochus almost perfectly. Well, not so fast. For centuries, interpreters have looked at the massive scale of Daniel's other visions and thought, 2,300 literal days, that's just a little over 6 years. It feels kind of small. And this led them to a totally different way of reading prophetic time.
And that's where this idea called the day for a year principle comes in. It's a whole different method of interpretation. The idea comes from other parts of the Bible, like in Numbers and Ezekiel, where God symbolically makes one day equal to 1 year.
So if you apply that same logic here, this prophecy suddenly blows up into a massive 2,300-year timeline that stretches way, way beyond ancient Greece.
Now, when you look at it through this 2,300-year lens, Antiochus isn't the main events anymore. He's more like a preview, a forerunner. Thinkers like Sir Isaac Newton saw the little horn as a symbol for the rise of the papacy in Rome. Others later thought it pointed to the rise of Islam in the East. For these groups, the cleansing of the sanctuary wasn't something that happened in the past. It was a huge spiritual event yet to come, and it famously led one group to pinpoint the year 1844 as the big moment.
But there's a pretty big roadblock for these long timeline theories. People who stick with the historical view will point you right back to the text itself. The prophecy is explicit. The little horn comes out of one of the 4 Greek kingdoms. That's a very specific geographical anchor, and it's a really tough hurdle for any theory that wants to place the fulfillment in Rome or Arabia instead.
So in the end, this 2,300-day prophecy leaves us at this really fascinating crossroads. Is it a stunningly accurate map of an ancient crisis, one that was fulfilled down to the day by Antiochus? Or is that whole crisis just a pattern, a type of warning about a much, much bigger spiritual conflict that's been playing out over thousands of years? It forces us to ask a really fundamental question about prophecy itself. Is it meant to be a map of the past, or is it a warning for the future?